Last week we saw how terrible it was and how Saul disobeyed and fell away. And because of his disobedience, God took his spirit away from him. Imagine all of a sudden being overwhelmed by the world and you decided to quit. If you quit Jesus, what kind of attitude, what kind of feeling will you have? I hope you'll be as miserable as Saul was. Wasn't enough for him to repent and change. I've given there the 5 points we looked at last week of what he did wrong and how he fell away. And so tonight, let's look at what's the next step. What's going to happen? Giving you there the years that each of these first three kings reigned. Each served 40 years. Makes me think of Moses' life. He was 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness, and 40 years leading the Israelites out of bondage and through the wilderness to the promised land. And God works in mysterious ways, but each of these men served in a different way. But David was picked because he said, here's a man after my own heart. Well, at first, wasn't he satisfied with Saul? Wasn't he pleased? Wasn't he delighted? And yet, Saul changed and left that humility and became prideful, and he changed. And so we think about that rise and fall of Saul. He began his monarchy with humility. He hid. He didn't want to be selected. And yet pride overcame him, and several transgressions that really broke the camel's back, I guess you might say. What were they? 3 of them. Yes, he took upon himself acting like a priest, and he says, I'm king, I'll do what I want to. And he was fearful of the Philistines, and so he made a sacrifice. Well, it wasn't his area. He stepped out of bounds. So that was wrong. What was the other 2? Remember Amalekites? And he brought the king back, brought the cows back, and he says, oh, God's going to be happy with these sacrifices before the people, and I'll make a big show. And it's like, see what I've done? But Samuel says, God would rather you obey instead of make sacrifices. Now, was God not a God that didn't want sacrifices? No. He had specified different sacrifices for different things, but according to his word. And so David stepped out of bounds. What was the third and last? At first he was sound and concerned about keeping Israel pure, and he did away with all the witches and all the sorcerers and all those that had some kind of spirit that maybe was forecasting or foretelling the future, and I don't know what all that was, but some kind of evil. And he got rid of them. He sent them out of Israel or killed them. And then he wanted to know what was going to happen. And he looked for one of these women who could do that. And he went to Endor, the woman from Endor, and asked her. And of all the people that realized she didn't have any power, I imagine she was just as surprised when here Samuel, who had died, comes back, and there's that story there.
It said
and,
when she saw the spirit, it scared her.
Yeah.
You figured if you could really do that, you wouldn't be scared if you saw it.
Right. And so that was the last, and we see that God says, tomorrow you and your sons will die. And they go to battle against the Philistines, and Saul is injured, and he wants his sword holder, some servant, to kill him, and he won't do it, and Saul falls on his own sword and commits suicide. What's sad is Jonathan also dies. But one of the sons doesn't. He will, in time comes, he'll be serving as king for 2 years, even though David's been anointed. And so tonight, let's think about David. When Saul is sent to the house of Jesse, and he starts going through the sons, and nope, not this one. And he goes through all of them that's there, and he says, do you have any more sons? And the father says, oh yeah, one little boy, he's out in the sheep, but he's not qualified. We'll send for him. And we understand there in 1 Samuel 16 that Samuel anoints little David. Some say he's about 15 years old. Well, he's anointed king. Is he going to take the throne? Is he going to say, God, you've anointed me, I want it now. You get rid of Saul. Could he have gone and ordered the armies as king to end Saul's life and you know, take the throne?
He's just the next in line.
He's next in line, but he's got to wait, doesn't he? Well, it's not unusual for a young person to serve as a king. Manasseh in 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 1, was 12 years old when he took the throne. That's pretty young. That's even younger than what David might have been when he was anointed. So the lesson tonight, let's see how David waits upon God's timetable, upon his schedule. He doesn't run ahead of God and say, I want this, I want it now. And, well, isn't that what Saul did? He ran in front of God when he acted like a priest to offer that sacrifice. Isn't that what he did?
Just like what you brought up in your lesson on Sunday night about testing people that run ahead of God.
Yeah. How does a person run ahead of God?
They don't pray about what they're doing, and they make their own decisions.
Make their own decisions. They essentially say, God, I don't care what you want. I'm going to go do this. This is what I want. False teachers do that.
Sarah did that.
Sarah. Oh, yes.
Sarah.
How did that?
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a child.
She wasn't going to wait for God to bring a child to be the inheritance. She said, here's my handmaid. You go in to her and we'll have a baby. Yeah, that's a good example of running ahead of God.
The consequence too.
Yes. Anytime you run ahead of God, you're working on your own.
Yeah.
And so if the results aren't very good, what are you going to say? God, bail me out. You know?
Probably.
And he's going to want to see a change. He's going to want, hey, will you repent? Let's hear a little bit of remorse there. You got yourself in this. Prove to me that you're worthy of me bailing you out.
When you do that, you're basically saying you know more than God does. Because that's what Sarah was doing. They got impatient and said, well,
Do it fast.
God's not gonna do this, I can do it.
He's waited too long. He's
Forgot about it.
He's failed. Yeah, that's right. People often do that when they don't like the commands that God has given them to do. Baptism. What is it? It's just going down in the water. That water's nothing special. We believe that salvation comes when you confess Jesus. You're my Lord. I accept you in my heart. Please forgive me. Is that going before God? That's changing His law, His commands to something they want. It's something like taking a shortcut. Jim Hall was a preacher that I knew. When I was at Rising Star, he was at Early, Texas. He was the preacher for the early church, first century church at Early, Texas. But anyway, he told of a guy running a race. Here they start at the starting line. They run, and right around about quarter of the way, he just walks off the track into the field. It was crowded. Nobody noticed. And he walks over there to the other side, and just before or after the runners get to that point, he jumps in there at the end of the race, and he's got all kinds of energy, and he runs and wins. He didn't run according to the rules, did he? Somebody running ahead of God is going against the rules. How do you like somebody, they introduce you to a game, cards or something, and as you play, they introduce the rules, and then you get to thinking, are you making up these rules as we go in your favor? Yeah, I kind of see this idea of going ahead of God, making your own rules. You know, it's like the cafeteria style eating. You know, we love going to First Cafeteria in Big Spring. They had all kinds of bread. They had different kinds of salads, different kind of meats, you know, and you could pick. My hardest trouble was at the dessert spot. Which dessert did I want to get? But according to appetite, according to your taste, and probably every time was different. And is that the way some people choose their religious practice? Oh, it's what I like. It's what tastes good in my mouth. It's good to my eyes. Well, let's go on to David. How did David refrain from just jumping in there and saying, the Spirit of God left Saul. Look what he's doing. He's wrong. He needs to be out of the way. We're going to look at several events. Remember the women singing the song, Saul has killed his thousands and David's killed his 10,000s. What results? What did Saul think about that? Envious. He was jealous. Why? I've been the head of this army all these years. You can't just knock everything I've done down. You know, he didn't want this young squirt, this young whippersnapper coming up and taking his glory. And so from then on, it says he had an evil eye toward David. How many times did he throw a javelin at him? How many times did he connive and plan to kill David? And so on the second page, we're talking about, that's something to think about. I told you about how old he was when he was anointed, But then in 2 Samuel 5 and 1 Chronicles 3, it tells us, Chronicles, sorry about that, he was about 30 years of age when he actually got to be king over Israel. That's 15 years. What did David do in those 15 years? Did he twiddle his thumbs? Did he wait patiently? Impatiently? Well, I think he did it with great restraint. Because it says in 1 Samuel 16, he loved Saul greatly. Now, remember when Saul had the evil spirit and he was mean and Jonathan, I think it was, said, David, come and play the harp for Saul. And sure enough, when David came and played the harp for Saul, what happened? He was calmed. The Spirit of the Lord almost returned to him. He was like the old Saul, as long as he could hear. And so here's David brought into the household, sitting at the table, eating with the family. Saul loving him as a son until it changed. Well, in 1 Samuel 24, verses 1 through 12, there at En-gedi, something happened. Several things. Well, next week we'll talk about Shimei, and that's within this story here. But Saul has been chasing him with, I think, 300 soldiers to try to kill David. And they come to an evening where he goes into the cave, and it says he puts his feet up or covers his feet. That simply means he's going to bed, going to sleep.
Oh, he's using the restroom.
Well, there's another story there.
That's what I always pictured it as.
Yeah. Oh, well, no, he's asleep because he goes in there and stands over Saul.
Read it again.
Okay, let's go to 1 Samuel 24.
He was hiding.
Well, he was chasing him, and then Saul gets word that the Philistines are attacking, and he goes and deals with that. And David is in the wilderness of En-gedi, verse 1. Verse 2, then Saul took 3,000 chosen, I said 300, I got that wrong too, men out of all Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. And he came to the sheep cots by the way where was a cave. And Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. So David's come in, and David's men are hiding in there, and they're, I guess, a little bit further deep in the cave, and they're being quiet, and they could have been caught.
The New American Standard says relieve himself. That's
Okay.
probably what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Right? Says that he went in to relieve himself. You know, who knows?
What that meant.
But I mean,
Well,
yeah, most likely, I mean, because he cut off a piece of his robe.
Yeah.
So most likely it wasn't just using.
well,
the
he's
rest
not
of it.
awake when he does it.
Right. Most
You know,
likely he was
he-
laying down to rest. Yeah.
David secretly cuts that part of the skirt off his robe.
Yeah.
And nobody knows that they're there, and they escape, and then they go to another mountaintop, and David shouts down to them.
And there's
Got him.
Verse 8,
there's-
what?
there's another story too where he was in the camp, and he went to go and
Well, I have that next.
Oh, okay.
At Ziph,
I'm running.
Z-I-P-H.
I'm running ahead of Greg.
Watch out, I'll bring my wrath down on you. But, and so here's David bending over Saul and cuts that skirt off. And a little bit later on it says he felt guilty of just doing that, of cutting that skirt. He didn't want to mistreat Saul any way whatsoever. He didn't want to shame him. He didn't want to embarrass him. He didn't want to act in any ill way
Well, why did he
toward
do
the
that?
king.
Why did he do that?
Because
To let him know that
then he goes
was
up
sneaky.
and he says, Saul, look,
Yeah,
why, if you think I'm mad or
Or I
want
killed
your
you,
death,
yeah.
I could have had
Yeah.
you. I was standing over you. Instead of cutting the skirt, I could have cut your throat. That's a proof of David's loyalty and love towards Saul.
David's men were kind of egging him on.
Oh,
too.
yeah. I'm glad you said that. Hey, David, here's your chance. The Spirit of the Lord's left him. Here's a sign. He's coming to your midst. Take him. Kill him. Get rid of him. And you won't be chased anymore.
But
But
David,
no, David says, I can't do that against God's anointed.
David respected the position of the king, but more importantly, he respected God.
Yes. So are we seeing the kind of character that David has? Exactly.
That's how we should be.
Yes.
David knew he was going to be king, but he was going to become king on God's terms,
Yeah.
however it
because he
happened.
trusted God. He
Yes.
had faith in God, because he wouldn't have got Goliath if he hadn't.
Now,
Because he had faith that whatever God said would happen,
Well,
and it
he-
had.
God sent Samuel, his judge, to anoint him. So in his heart, he says, God wouldn't go through all that to deny me the throne. I'll wait. He'll give it to me. I like his words there in verse 10. Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how that the Lord has delivered you this day into my hand in that cave. And some bade me to kill you, but mine eye spared thee. And I said, I will not put forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Well, there's another event that happens. Now we go to the other, 1 Samuel 16. And this must have been before, because it's chapter 16. 16, 1 through 12. David says to his men, I want to go down into the camp of Saul. Who'll go with me? And
Greg, that's not the right. That's not the
Pardon?
right. That's not the right chapter.
Where are you?
You went
Wait,
way
okay,
too
let's see,
further
let's see.
backwards.
Yeah, that's.
It
where
can't be
he's
16.
anointing
uh,
David.
thank you.
Number 17?
No.
Yeah, it's 26, chapter 26.
Verses 1 through 12, or,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, verse 6. Who will go down with me to Saul to the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. And so by night they sneak down there, and Saul is laying within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. I guess that's a holster or something around him. But Abner and the people lay around about him. So they've got Saul in the center, and he's surrounded by his men, so he can't be surprised. And no one can sneak up and kill him. But somehow, he gets there. Verse 8, then said Abishai to David, God has delivered thine enemy into your hand this day. Now therefore, let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear even to the earth at once. and I will not smite him the second time. He said, one time's all I need, David. Was he going to take Saul's own spear? That kind of makes me think that, doesn't it? And David said to Abishai, destroy him not. For who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said furthermore, as the Lord lives, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to an end, or he shall descend into battle and perish. He's saying, Saul's going to come to an end, one way or the other. You know, is there another way besides those three? God's going to do it, or he's going to die a natural death, or he's going to die in battle. Well, how does he die?
On his own sword.
On his own sword. When you have an evil spirit, you don't care about life. You don't care about what's right. You allow anything to come in your mind, and it'll be that what you do.
Saul was trying to just end his suffering because he was already dead. He was wounded.
He was wounded. Yeah.
He was wounded, and yeah, I'm dead, but I'm not dead.
He was afraid he was going to fall into the hands of the enemy too.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And aren't they beheaded, and their heads put on the wall, or the bodies put on the wall?
Yeah, they cut them in pieces or something, hang them on the wall, and then
Yeah.
David's men go and get them back or bury them or something like that.
Oh, and David, the people that take Saul's body and buries them, he rewards them for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, David, in verse 11, speaking down to Saul, the Lord forbid that I should stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed, but I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at the bolster and the cruse of water, and let us go. And so they go to the top of the hill, verse 13, and David cries to Abner. He brings Abner on the red carpet. He says, Abner, you're the king of Saul's army. You're responsible for keeping Saul safe. You have fallen down on your job. Shame on you. And David said, you're worthy, because of this, you're worthy to die yourself. And so now he speaks to Saul, and Saul knew David's voice there in verse 17. David says, it is my voice, my Lord and King. How could you interpret that to be anything else than loyalty? My Lord, my King. Now, is he referring to Saul as Lord, as something mightier than you think? No, it's just a
Title.
A title of respect. That's right. He said, wherefore doth my Lord thus pursue your servant? For what have I done? What evil is in my hand? Now therefore I pray, let my Lord the King hear the words of his servant. If the Lord have stirred thee up against me, let him accept an offering. And he goes on. And I kind of like, here's a moment of clarity for Saul. He repents. He says, I'm sorry. Or excuse me, I've sinned. Verse 21. And he said, my son, David, for I will no more do harm to you, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. So Saul finally understands At this moment, it doesn't last, but at this moment, and during all this time, David shows his trust to God, and he waits on him, and he's not wanting any shortcuts to the throne. What might appear to be the easiest way is not always the right course to take. David knows that. Even when Saul looked upon David with envy, chapter 18, even when he was planning David's ruin or death, here's David. I won't raise my hand against the anointed. Was it just toward the king as representing the authority over the nation? Or was it toward Saul as a man? Because of that personal connection that he had. Probably both. So at the end of Saul, he transgressed with that woman of Endor, and there in 1 Samuel 28 and 1 Chronicles 10, we see Saul dead. In 2 Samuel, we have the recording of what David felt. He was in great sorrow. He lamented greatly at the deaths of Saul and Jonathan. And there's a lot more to the story before he actually gets to the throne. He acts honorably towards some of the relatives of Saul. Mephibosheth, I think that's how you pronounce his name. But next time I want us to look at 2 Samuel 16, in verses 5 through 13, and see this man by the name of Shimei. You know, if someone's cursing you, talking bad about your mama, about your children, what's the first thing you want to do?
Smack them in the mouth.
Stand up and defend your family. Resort to, I'm going to shut you up. And his
that's what his men were telling him to do.
yes, hey, David, let me at him. I'll shut this dog up. But I like the way David answers that, and that'll be next time. Any questions or any comments? All right. I will be having notes for next Wednesday night ready for you to pick up Sunday. So be watching that for that. So it'll be in your hands early and you can do some study before we get there. Appreciate all the comments. Ray, would you close it with prayer?
Sure.